We are nearing the end of this magisterial work, Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers. We're up to chapter 6, Mishnah number 8. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer. Rabbi Shimon, son of Yehuda, he says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Of course, the great Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, one of the great sages of the Mishnaic era. And this is a statement attributed to him. Hanoi v'hakoach v'haosher v'hakavod v'hachachma v'zikna v'aseva v'abanim. They list 7 things. Beauty, strength, wealth, honor, wisdom, old age, sagacity, and children. Na'el tzadikim v'na'a la'olam. They befit, or they benefit, the righteous and the world. So it lists 7 qualities and says that this is good, this is beneficial for the righteous and for the world. And then it lists a bunch of scriptural proofs to prove this point. Shenamar cites the verse, a crown of splendor is ripe age. In the path of righteousness it can be found. That's one verse. And then it lists another verse, V'omer, a second verse, Ateris zikenim b'nei banim, the crown of the aged is grandchildren, and the splendor of children is their fathers. And another verse, Tiferes bachurim kocham, the splendor of young men is their strength, and the glory of old men is sagacity. Okay, another verse, embarrassed will the moon be, and shamed will the sun be, for reign will Hashem, master of legions, on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his elders shall be honor. Okay, so I brought a few verses to prove this point. And the Mishnah ends, Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya says, these 7 qualities that were enumerated by the sages for the righteous, they were all realized, they were all actualized in Rabbi Judah the Prince and in his sons. So it lists 7 qualities: beauty, strength, riches, honor, wisdom, and old age, and sagacity, and children. And it tells us that these qualities, they benefit the righteous, but they also benefit the world. So of course we have to figure out what exactly does it mean by these qualities, and what does it mean that it's beneficial for the righteous and for the world, and what exactly are we supposed to do about these insights, and how our sages are telling us that these qualities are beneficial for the righteous and for the world. So the commentaries tell us that these qualities, they can be deployed in different ways. They can be used for good and for bad. And therefore, for the righteous who understand how to properly channel and how to properly assess and deploy these qualities, for them, it's actually beneficial. But for others, they could perhaps use it in harmful, in injurious ways. They could use it for negative uses. And the way the Medrash Shmuel, one of the great commentators on our book, the way he frames this Mishnah is that these 7 qualities, it's beneficial if you want righteousness. Meaning, if you're pursuing righteousness, these things can serve as aids in your pursuit of righteousness, but it could be also used for the world. And the way he defines that is that it could be used for depravity. If you want to be drawn away from God, and instead you want to be drawn to the world, to physicality, to materialism, to pursuit of hedonistic, nihilistic pleasures. You want to be drawn to the futility of a passing, ephemeral, transient world. You want to live a life of vacuousness, of ignorance of the spiritual realm, of the world to come. These things can also aid in that pursuit. Now it's interesting that in this understanding of the Mishnah, the world is synonymous with being distant from God. We think of the world as being kind of this blank slate, this canvas in which people choose righteousness or wickedness. But by this interpretation of the Mishnah, there's two like a binary choice here. There's two divergent options. It's righteousness. It's being connected with the Almighty. It's living life for a higher purpose, or being drawn to the world. And my grandfather of blessed memory, in one of his books, he talks about an experience that he had when he was a young yeshiva student. He was in a yeshiva in Switzerland, in a place called Mantra. It's spelled with like E's and U's and H's, but the H is silent. Montre, I think is how you pronounce it. And it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And he writes that he had anticipated that when he's going to go see this incredible, stunning, breathtaking beauty of the Almighty's world, that will enhance his relationship with the Almighty. Think about it. You see the mastery of God and this incredible, gorgeous tapestry of a world that he wove for us. That's inspiring. That's awe-inducing. So he was very excited to go there because he thought that experience, that venue, that incredible location would deepen his connection with the Almighty. And then he writes, but the opposite was true. Because being drawn to the world, being drawn to the physical world, by definition, pulls you away from God. We've mentioned this in the past. The Hebrew word for world is olam, which is the same word as he'elem, which means obscurity. The world, the essence of the world, the definition of the world is obscurity. It obscures. What does it obscure? The only thing that actually matters, God. And thus we see the polarity over here in the Mishnah. These 7 things, they're good for one use case, righteousness, and they're also good for another use case, which is defined in the Mishnah as the world, and that is the opposite. That is everything which is not righteousness. These 7 things are a double-edged sword. They can be used for the most beneficial end, for righteousness, or they can be used for other things. They can be misused for the world, for sin, for distancing oneself from God. And number 1 on our list is beauty. Of course, today you got to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Everyone is really handsome and beautiful. You just have to appreciate it. There's different tastes. And that's probably true on some level. But when someone's very handsome and very beautiful in an objective way, they have different sorts of tests, and they are faced with different challenges. And the commentaries tell us of one of the greatest heroes of our people, who was very handsome, and that was actually a catalyst for them to become righteous. And that, of course, is Joseph. Remember Joseph, the son of Jacob, beloved by his father. He gives him a special garment. The brothers are envious. They want to kill him. They ultimately sell him as a slave. He ends up in Egypt. And the master's wife, the mistress, Miss Potiphar, she wants to seduce him. She's very desirous of him. Joseph he's gorgeous. And the Torah says that explicitly. He's a stud. And he has to wrestle with this unique challenge as a result of his beauty. And he's being repeatedly propositioned, and he's always pushing her away. And then one time she disrobes him. We know the story. And he flees, and he's imprisoned for 10 years. But he becomes elevated in the spiritual domain to be a tzaddik, to be righteous. His beauty was used for righteousness. It was a boon for him because he became this transcendental hero, and he's the paradigmatic example of someone who overcame physical, carnal temptation. I had a chat with my brother-in-law a couple of days ago, and he mentioned in his conversation that if you look at scripture, when at the end of Genesis, so Joseph's in Egypt and Jacob's despondent and there's a famine and the brothers come and they meet Joseph, they don't recognize him, and he's toying with them, playing games with him. We know the story. Eventually Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. I'm Joseph, you sold me to Egypt. No hard feelings. Go back to Canaan, bring Jacob. And you read the verse. Jacob, when he discovers that Joseph is still alive, he says, I want to go see him before I die. Chapter 45, verse 28. Od Yosef ben Ichai, my son Joseph is still alive. Let me go. Let me see him. B'terem amus, before I die. And the question is, Jacob clearly believes in the afterlife. He knows that when someone dies, that's not the end. You still live forever. Jacob knew that for sure. So what's this urgency? I gotta quickly see Joseph before I die. It's on my bucket list. People of Jacob's caliber don't have bucket lists. When you realize that this world is just temporary, you're just trying to get to your destination. It's a corridor before Olam Haba. You don't have a bucket list. So why is Jacob saying, I gotta see Joseph? You'll see Joseph in the afterlife. What are you worried about? That was the question that was posed. And my brother-in-law cited from one of the sages. Jacob is a prophet. He knows what Joseph had to endure in Egypt. And in fact, if you look at the blessings that Jacob gave Joseph before he passed, he's invoking those stories in the episode between Joseph and his master's wife. When Joseph overcame that temptation, Jacob understood, or Jacob feared, that if I don't see Joseph now, I'll never see him again. Because Joseph standing in heaven is going to tower over me. I won't have access to Joseph's realm in heaven. Why? Because of what he became, the spiritual accomplishments that he garnered as a result of him overcoming this temptation. I have to see him now before I die, because once I'm dead, even though the afterlife is forever, he'll be in a different planet spiritually because of what he accomplished. So beauty, it's a double-edged sword. It can lead you to very depraved places. But look what it did for Joseph. Joseph, he was righteous, and he ended up becoming ever more righteous as a result of having this unique challenge, this unique temptation. Is being ugly better? I don't know. That's not what the Mishnah is addressing. But certainly, for Joseph, had he been repulsive and off-putting, he would never have achieved that level of righteousness. But only because Joseph was so beautiful were those temptations, those challenges so intense, and thus the overcoming of it, that yielded tremendous righteousness. For Joseph, for the righteous, it was a benefit. But of course, the opposite is true as well. Double-edged sword. It can be used for deepening a person's connection to this world, to its potential for sinfulness. There's another element of beauty that can serve as a double-edged sword. You think about, now it's election season. And we know, if you met an alien and you show them pictures of every presidential election, since 200 years ago, and they don't know anything, you say, who won the election? I bet they would get 80% correct. Because how does it work here? This is America. We're a little vain, okay? If someone's very tall and very handsome and very confident, they have our trust. Looks kind of matter. The leader has that look. Someone who has beauty, they have influence. They have power. People look to them for guidance. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? It can be used in multiple ways. When someone has a leadership persona and they encourage people to be more righteous, to deepen their connection with their Creator, to focus on their spiritual halves, someone like that is deploying it for righteousness. On the flip side, we have Avshalom, Absalom. Absalom was absolutely gorgeous. In fact, the verse tells us there was no one amongst the whole land there was no man as beautiful, as gorgeous as Avshalom, the son of David. How was he able to mount a rebellion against his own father, against David? Think about it. It's like multiple layers of depravity, right? Not only is he mounting a rebellion against his father is King David, the greatest king we've ever had. And he gets a following. Why? Because he looked like a leader in a way no one else ever did. And he had an irresistible charm to him. And look what happened to him. He rebelled against his father, and he ended up dead in quite an ironic way. His outrageous hair got caught in the branches, and he was speared to death by David's soldiers. Beauty, when used properly, when marshaled properly, can lead to righteousness. The opposite is also true. And then we have strength. Is physical strength, physical prowess a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it could be both. It's a double-edged sword. Physical strength is needed for righteousness. If someone is weak and feeble and fragile and always tired and always sick and always under the weather and always sniffles, someone like that is having a very hard time keeping up with the rigors of intense spiritual life, with the pursuit of righteousness. The Talmud tells us studying Torah makes you weak. It saps your energy. You need a lot of energy to do it. I remember when I was in yeshiva, we would study 3-4 hours. I would have breakfast, and then I was like famished. You're famished. It's only been a couple of hours, because if your mind's engaged in the Almighty's Torah, that is a draw on your energies in a way that other things are just not comparable. You need a lot of physical strength. So if someone has physical strength, they're endowed with physical strength, they could use that for wonderful things. And of course, the example we mentioned in the past, Rabbi Yochanan was the greatest sage in the land of Israel, and he has this chance encounter with one of the most physically imposing bandits of all time. He's leaping over the Jordan River. He would be today a triathlete, an Ironman, an Olympian, a Mr. Universe. This is a bandit, Reish Lakish. And Rabbi Yochanan is bathing in the Jordan. He sees this incredible specimen. And he says to him 2 words, Chelach la'oraisa, your strength should be used for Torah. And of course, the bandit responds, you're so beautiful. Yaf yach l'noshim, your beauty should be for women, because he was so gorgeous. And we know the story, they strike a deal. Rabbi Yochanan says, I'll persuade my sister, who's even more beautiful than me, to marry you if you commit yourself to study Torah. And indeed, he became the second greatest sage in the land. Physical strength, it matters. And it can be used for righteousness. You think about how demanding the Torah schedule is. You got to pray with intensity, with devotion. You got to study. You got to do mitzvos. You got to help others, do kindness and charity, and visit the sick. Think about how demanding someone who takes this very seriously How taxing is it? Physical strength can be used for that. It's very useful for the righteous. But of course, it, on the flip side, can be used for sin, for bonding to the world, for engaging in its depravity, degeneracy, degradation, and debauchery. You can use your physical strength and your prowess to violence, to trying to suppress others, to compel others, to overpower others, to domineer. Is physical strength a good thing or a bad thing? It depends. It's on our list. It's good for righteousness and it's good for the world if that's what you want. And then comes wealth. Is that a good thing or not? Well, it could be both. Wealth can be, of course, a catalyst for great righteousness. If someone has physical resources and wherewithal, they can use it to do kindness and charity and helping others and saving others who have needs. And the commentators cite the example of Munbas, King Munbas, a great hero. There was a drought, there was a famine. And the king opened up his storage houses and distributed money and resources and food to the needy. And he was part of a great dynasty, the Talmud tells us. And his fellow regents, his fellow aristocrats were very put off by his liberal distribution of resources. And they said to him, listen, this wealth, it was amassed by our antecedents, by our ancestors, by our predecessors, and you're just giving it away. And he responded, listen to his response. My parents, my antecedents, they made huge stockpiles of wealth down below. I also made huge stockpiles of wealth, but not down below. I made it up above. My antecedents, they stockpile their wealth in a place where it's still accessible. If someone comes, they break in, they do a heist, it can be stolen. Where I placed my resources, I placed it in a location it's untouchable. It's underneath the throne of God, so to speak, in heaven. It's safe forever. You think about how many people this king saved, how many people would have died of hunger. And he saved thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And all their descendants, every mitzvah that any one of their descendants does gets attributed back to the largesse of King Munbas during this drought. This is just one example of how money, how physical resources can be used for righteousness. The Talmud tells us that the mitzvah of charity, tzedakah, it is equal to the whole Torah put together. It's just one mitzvah that could be a wellspring of righteousness. Think about if someone wants righteousness, how beneficial it is to have the resources. If someone wants to study Torah, but they gotta go push the paper, count the beans every day. They gotta chop the wood every day. They gotta send those emails and produce those widgets every day. Someone who has the resources, they can study unencumbered. What a gift. What a blessing. The peace of mind that comes with assets. If someone wants to study unencumbered, it's unbelievable. On the flip side, it can be an impetus for a person to deepen the connection with physicality, with the mundane. Someone could choose a life of hedonism, only trying to party and engage in delicacies and vacations and pleasures and yachts and all sorts of debased, physical, carnal behavior, they can become a degenerate. If you want to live a life of physicality, of nihilism, well, having the resources will help you in that pursuit as well. I always think it's a good thought experiment to think about, when they have those big jackpots, the lotteries, when on the signs on the highway, they only have 3 digits. So when it's like over $1 billion, it's just 999, right? Like, wow, so much money. And then someone wins, and it's never you. It hasn't been quite yet. It's not you. It's not anyone you know. It's always from someone from California, okay? From California. Or New Hampshire. But it's, I think, a useful exercise to think about, a thought experiment, to think about, like, what would you do if you won the lottery? Are you going to choose the path of righteousness or the path of degeneracy? Because you think about, I'm going to buy this Ferrari, Lamborghini, I'm going to buy myself islands, I'm going to party in a yacht. That's a very natural impulse. And that's what the Mishnah is informing us. Like, great wealth can be used for incredible things in the realm of righteousness, and it could be used for degeneracy as well. And the commentaries cite the statement in Mesilas Yesharim in Path of the Righteous, where he talks about how the dogged pursuit of financial wealth can be a life sentence, his words. It could be bondage forever. Why? Because the verse says, if you love money, you'll never be satiated. So someone wants money and they got it. And they hit their benchmark. They hit their target asset value. And they think they'll be happy, but no, because you have 100, now you want 200, you have 200, now you want 400, and so on. So this is what they call the rat race. You'll never get out of it. If someone wants the finances for finance's sake, it could be never ending, and it could take over your life, and it could be a waste of a life. But of course, if it's deployed properly, it's a wonderful blessing. So we don't glorify poverty. That's not part of our religious framework. The Talmud does say, in fact, that be very careful from the children of the poor because they may become great Torah scholars. But as an ideal, that's not a Jewish belief. In fact, what does it say about Jacob? Well, the blessings he stole with an assist from his mom, the blessings that were intended for Esav, were all about financial greatness. Tala shamayim, the dew of the heaven, the fat of the earth, lots of wealth. That's a good thing. But it's also a dangerous thing. And that's what the Mishnah is trying to advise us. The glorification of poverty and privation, that's not our religion. We don't believe in that. We believe that it's a blessing when the Almighty showers you with blessing, but it's also a test, and that's what the Mishnah is trying to highlight. Next on our list is kavod, honor, distinction. When someone's distinguished, they're important. They matter. They are influential. People are going to listen to them. When someone's an honored, distinguished person, they have clout. They have the ability to influence and direct the masses. And that, again, is a double-edged sword. They can influence the masses to do what's right, to guide the people to become closer to Hashem. It could be marshaled for the best use in the world, to bring Hashem's subjects closer to their Creator. It could also serve as a means to be humble. Imagine if someone's honorable, distinguished. People defer to him. He's a respected elder statesman. But nevertheless, such a person is humble, doesn't assert superiority over others, doesn't lord over others. That's a way to achieve transcendental greatness. What does it take to be a prophet? What are the criteria for prophecy? What are the prerequisites for prophecy? So the Talmud tells us, you have to be wise, you have to be physically strong, and you have to be rich. Well, you also have to be humble. Wait, what? Why do you have to be physically strong and honorable in other ways? Be wise, be rich, and also be humble. Like, what is the meaning behind this very unique set of prerequisites? And the commentators tell us, the only thing that matters is humility. But if someone's poor and feeble and dense, well, it's not so hard to be humble. But if someone is wealthy and they're strong and they're bright and they're intelligent and they have everything going for them, and nevertheless they're humble, they can use that to achieve prophecy, which is the highest class that a human can be part of. But of course, honor and distinction and influence can be used for the opposite ends, to dominate others, to try to impose upon others, to control others, and to do that for your own sake, not for the sake of heaven. To be haughty, to be able to sin with impunity. Someone who's honorable, they can sin flagrantly, wantonly, and publicly, and no one will reprimand them. In that case, honor will lead him away from God and into the morass and quagmire of the world. It is yet another double-edged sword. The next on our list is wisdom. Is wisdom good or bad? So we would think of it as, well, wisdom. Wisdom's good. And let's assume we're talking about wisdom of Torah, the highest and greatest class of wisdom. So it's obvious why it would be a boon for the righteous. Think about what wisdom does. It's our connection with the Almighty. And it could be used to guide us to living the best life that we can live. And we would deploy our wisdom, if we had it, and insight and intellect for how to improve ourselves and how to find the truth. We could use our faculties to find direction. But of course, wisdom could be used for other ends. Someone could be wise, and they could use that to seek recognition and honor and greatness and grandeur. Earlier on in our book, we learned how Torah can be misused and misappropriated. And we were cautioned and warned, don't make it a hoe to dig with. Don't make it a crown to be glorified with. Don't say, I have my agenda, I have things that I want, and I'm going to use the Torah, use the Almighty's holy Torah to advance my agenda. The Talmud tells us that Torah, it's like a medicine. It's a potion. It's an elixir. But it could be an elixir of life. It could infuse you with life in a way nothing else can. But it could also be a potion of death. If you're using the Torah for your own benefit, if you're using it to advance your own agenda, if you're using it to make it a crown to glorify yourself or a shovel to dig with, that is a misuse of Torah. And that will actually not draw you closer to the Almighty, the Mishnah tells us. It will actually draw you away from Him. And as a potion of death, you will be drawn towards the world. And then there's age and experience and sagacity. Someone's old. They've been around the block. This is not their first rodeo. They have experience. They have wisdom. They've seen a thing or two. Is this good or is this bad? Well, of course, it could be good. It could be beneficial. Because what does it mean if someone is old and a veteran, an expert? It means they've been around for a while. They've lived a long life. Is it good to live a long life or not? Well, it really depends on with what you occupy yourself with what you use your time for. Time is golden and time is precious because of the opportunities that time affords. Time avails for a person the ability to do a mitzvah, to do a chesed, to study a word of Torah, to say a prayer. The Mishnah earlier again tells us, one moment in this world outweighs the whole world to come. Once someone passes, their ability to permanently upgrade their soul goes away. And thus on one dimension, on the dimension of doing mitzvahs, of doing righteousness, of upgrading yourself, this world outweighs the whole world to come. And one moment in this world is better than the whole world to come. So age, a long life, that can be a very, very good thing for the righteous. But of course, for the wicked, hate to say it, they're better off having to die young. Because think about it, if someone's wicked, it's a crazy thing to say, but if someone's wicked, then the longer they're here, the more corruption they're introducing to their soul. The more sin they are perhaps committing. And therefore, again, it's a harsh thing to say. But from the perspective of their soul, they're better off not being here. We actually have an example of this in Genesis. Enoch. He lived a short life. It was only 365 years. It was short by Genesis standards. And he was righteous and he walked with God. But he was taken early. That's what the verse tells us. Rashi there comments from the sources that he was righteous. But God foresaw that he was heading towards a path of wickedness. And therefore in his tremendous benevolence and kindness, Enoch, Hanoch, died young. Again, for us, this is like, we cannot make that calculation, even though we can understand the concept. A long life is good for the righteous, and it's very bad for the wicked, because they have a lot more time and a lot more opportunities to sin. And finally, we have the last of our list, and that is sons. Having a nice big family. Is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? So the commentaries cite an incredible teaching from the Zohar. While it is true that once someone passes, their ability to influence their eternal standing has ended, well, there's a little bit of a loophole. And that loophole is their children. Once someone passes, they can't do mitzvahs. They don't have a yetzer hara. They don't have the ability. They don't have the tools to do a mitzvah, or a sin for that matter. But the behavior of their children actually influences their standing in heaven. And if their children are righteous, well, then they benefit from that in heaven. And if the children are wicked, well, then they suffer for that in heaven. It's quite literally a life extension. Their life gets extended with their children. And thus, if you're righteous and if your children are righteous, you're actually very good having a nice big family. Conversely, if you are wicked and your children would be wicked, maybe it's better to remain childless because you don't want to perpetuate a path of wickedness. And I found it interesting, the commentators, when they talk about this clause of the Mishnah, they talk about something which I think is maybe a less common sentiment today. Today, a lot of people are worried about the fertility crisis, that the fertility rate around the world is shrinking. And it's causing a problem with a lot of old people and not enough young people. And the population is, in certain places, is shrinking because the fertility rate is below replacement level. People don't want to have as many kids today as they used to, for whatever reason. Maybe it's religious, maybe it's societal, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's financial. Everyone's trying to figure out what the answer to that question is. But the numbers don't lie. People are less likely to have large families, or more people are likely to remain childless, and so on. But in antiquity, people had a lot of pride in having a very large family. Now, no one cites this example, but if you recall in the story of Purim, when Haman is talking to his wife in chapter 5 of the book of Esther, he speaks to his family about his honor and his wealth, virov banav, and his very large family. People used to have pride, like I'm building an empire. I got my nice coat of arms, and we're going to have this compound for our family. People had familial pride. And that's good unless it makes you arrogant. It makes you feel superior to others. That's when it gets dangerous. And that's this double-edged sword that's referred to in our Mishnah. So, of course, the Mishnah lists these 7 things that can be used for positive aims, but can be misused to draw a person towards the world and away from God. And for us, of course, it is a warning. When you are aware of this, and you understand the consequences, you will be very careful about them. You'll realize that these things are volatile. You have to weigh them on a scale to understand, how am I employing, how am I directing, how am I channeling this quality? And when someone says, I'm going to marshal these qualities towards righteousness, I'm going to choose to be a tzaddik with them, then they are taking the lesson of this Mishnah to heart. There's an adjacent idea to this that I want to share with you. Right now, we are in the middle of the month of Av. We just had Tisha B'Av a couple of days ago. Even though the podcast will only be released in a few weeks, it'll already be the month of Elul. But I heard something very fascinating about this month and what the objective that we are supposed to do when we are marking the destruction of the temple and we're mourning for it. Like what's the proper sentiment we're supposed to have, and what are we supposed to do with this experience? A lot of people I don't want to mourn. I haven't been to the temple. It was destroyed 1950 plus years ago. I don't understand what all the hullabaloo is all about. So I heard someone who cited an ancient work that observed that there's only one month in the Torah that we have a name for it. Typically in the Torah, the months are numbered, the first month, the second month, and so on, but we don't have a name for the month. The names for the month came much later. So we do have names for the month, but it's not featured in the Torah. We have Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, Adar. Those are the names that we have. They're Persian names, Babylonian names, but they're not Hebrew names, but they were adopted by us. There's only one month in the Torah that is named, it's also numbered, but it's named with a name. And that is the month of Nisan, which is called in the Torah Chodesh HaAviv. Aviv is the Hebrew word for springtime. But this work observed that the month of Nisan, which is the month in which we, of course, experienced the Exodus, in the Torah it's called Aviv. And the month of Tisha B'Av is the month of Av. Those two words, they share a Hebraic root, the word Av, which means father. And what this work suggested is that our nation's objective and our nation's destiny is to develop a fatherly or a relationship with our Father in heaven. And God wants to have a fatherly, filial connection with us. And there's really two ways to do it. There's the month of Aviv, which is the month of Nisan, which is the month of the Exodus. What happened in the Exodus? The Almighty absolutely humbled and destroyed our enemies and extracted us from the depths of despair and brought us to the highest of heights. We were given prominence and prestige and honor and glory and redemption and salvation and greatness. And that's one way to advance the objective of Him being a father to us. Chodesh HaAviv, Av, from the root of Av, which is Hebrew for father. And what happened? We got to the land and we had everything, but we became more sinful and we became distant from this goal, and we began to emulate the idolatrous neighbors, and we began to do all sorts of sin. But God didn't give up on us. He still wants to be our Father, but this time he used a very different tactic. Our cities were destroyed. Many thousands of our people were slaughtered. Our temple was burned. Our great sages were killed. Our masses were taken into exile. That's a very different tactic, but the goal is the same. The goal is to get us to create and to form and to deepen and to nurture and to sustain a relationship that he wants with us. And we get too far away, he will deploy one of these two tactics. When we're in a very low place, well, he'll save us, as he did in Chodesh HaAviv, in the festival of Pesach and the Exodus. But there's also another way to achieve the same goal, through the month of Av. And that's why the night of Tisha B'Av is always the same night of the week as the night of the Seder. And on both nights, the night before, we're supposed to eat an egg, and both are associated with the Messiah. And if you look at the kinos, the elegies that we say on Tisha B'Av, one of the most stirring and poignant ones is B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim and B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim. It compares the glory and the grandeur and the majesty that we had when we left Egypt with the depression and anguish and melancholy when we left, when we were booted, when we were exiled from Jerusalem. We were exiled in chains. And this is, of course, devastation for us. And they're contrasted in this elegy. So this is like a similar idea to what the Mishnah is telling us. It's almost the inverse of this idea. That wealth and honor and prestige and prominence and prosperity and glory, like the Exodus, can cause us to bond with our Creator. Tisha B'Av is a festival of the opposite variety. It's the inverse of that. It's a festival of distance, but that too can hopefully ignite a restoration of that fatherly connection that the Almighty is so desirous of having with us. Now the Mishnah ends with a statement that Rabbi Judah the Prince, of course the architect of the Mishnah, he had all these 7 qualities. Him and his sons, they had all these 7 qualities. And these 7 double-edged swords, beauty and wealth and honor and wisdom and so on, they were all featured in Rabbi Judah the Prince and his sons. And the commentaries go through the Talmud and find examples of Rabbi Judah the Prince having all these 7 qualities. For example, we're told that since the days of Moshe, how many years are there from Moshe to Rabbi Judah the Prince? Rabbi Judah the Prince lives around the year 200 of the Common Era, and Moshe is 1300 before the Common Era. It's 1500 years. We had a lot of heroes in the interim. King David and the prophet Samuel, all the prophets, all the kings, Solomon, Ezra, men of the Great Assembly, all the heroes of the first and second temples. From the days of Moshe until Rabbi Judah the Prince, there was never a person who had quite that same Torah v'Gedula. Torah greatness and Gedula and material and honor of the highest level. Rabbi Judah the Prince was the richest Jew and the greatest sage. And the Talmud tells us that he was the tallest amongst his generation. He had the look. He was tall. He was regal. He had all these qualities, but nevertheless, in each one of them, he was the exemplar of using it for the right cause. One of Rabbi Judah the Prince's names, he has a lot of different names in our literature. One of the names is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, Rabbi Judah the Prince. He's also called Rebbe, our teacher. The Talmud cites, we have hundreds, thousands of sages. It was just rabbi. Which rabbi? He says a lot of rabbis. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Meir, right? Lots of rabbis. If it's just rabbi, it's Rabbi Judah the Prince. Because he became like the rabbi of the whole nation. But he's also called Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He is called our holy teacher. And the Talmud says, why was he called our holy teacher? And the Talmud tells us, because in his entire life, his hands never went below his waist. He always held his hands up, never went below his waist, ever in his life. Talmud actually gives somewhat of a humorous story that after Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who was the Roman emperor, who was friendly with Rabbi Judah the Prince, as we know, we've seen that story many times, and he converted. They had they would study together, and they had tunnels that connected their palaces with each other. And after some time, the Roman Caesar actually converted and became a Jew. And he was circumcised as an adult. And he went to Rabbi Judah the Prince to evaluate his circumcision. Did they do a good job? Did they cut well properly? And Rabbi Judah the Prince says, I never looked at my own circumcision. I'm going to look at yours. No, that's not going to happen. He was so removed from any sort of impropriety. His hands never went below his waist. He was like this exemplar of holiness. And he was the richest Jew in the world. And the Talmud describes how even though, in antiquity it was really hard to find, today they have strawberries the whole year round and cherries the whole year round. It used to be that they were seasonal, right? Because otherwise you have to import it from Spain. How are you going to get it from Spain, right? It's 1,000 miles away. In the times in the house, in the palace, in the courtyard of Rabbi Judah the Prince, there was always snow and chazeres, these exotic fruits and vegetables, the whole year round. He was very wealthy. But the Talmud has a few very interesting pages that describe the death and the funeral and the burial and the eulogies of Rabbi Judah the Prince. And it gives a story that when he was about to pass, he lifted up his 10 fingers to heaven and he declared, I didn't garner any benefit from all my wealth, not even a small finger's amount. He lived an ascetic life, notwithstanding his tremendous wealth. None of his wealth filtered in and influenced him. He didn't misuse any of his gifts. Now, as a parenthetical point, there's a question that was once posed that I would like to now answer. Sometimes it takes me a couple of years to get around to your questions, and I apologize. Usually the emails, I respond more promptly. But Rabbi Judah the Prince, he's a name that we've seen a lot, and we're learning the Mishnah. That's his work, right? He's the architect of all 63 books of Mishnah, the present book of Mishnah, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers included. And he appears as the paragon of being like Jacob. So perhaps you recall when Rebecca is pregnant with twins, we later discover she's having a very difficult pregnancy, and she goes to the prophet. And the prophet tells her, there are 2 nations within you, and they're going to wage war with each other, they're going to spar with each other, and when one is up, the other one's down, and so on, but ultimately the younger one will prevail over the older one. And Rashi notes, when the verse says, Shnei goyim bivitnech, there are 2 goyim, 2 nations within you, the verse doesn't spell it like that. It spells it Shnei geyim bivitnech. There's 2 proud ones in your belly. And Rashi says, well, why is it spell it in that way? What's it hinting to? Why isn't it just spell Shnei goyim, 2 nations? So Rashi tells us, based upon the Talmud, that the prophet was invoking the 2 exemplars of Jacob and Esav and that's Rabbi Judah the Prince, and Antoninus, the aforementioned Roman, i.e. from Esav, Roman Caesar, who was like the best and most proud version of Esav. Someone who was like at the top of the world of the Esav hierarchy, but submitted himself to Rabbi Judah the Prince and became a convert. He is the exemplar of Esav. He's the best version of Esav. And we know, we've said the story in the past, that when Rabbi Judah the Prince was born, his father, he comes from the line of Hillel. Hillel, his son was Rabbi Shimon, his son was Rabbi Gamliel, his son was Rabbi Shimon, his son was Rabbi Gamliel, and so on. And his son was Rabbi Shimon, and his son is Rabbi Judah the Prince. This is the line of the prince of the nation. When he was born, that was at the tail end of the Hadrianic persecutions. Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian. He makes a decree that any Jewish boy who is circumcised, the boy and the boy's mother, will be chucked off a cliff. And a young baby is born, Judah. And of course the baby is circumcised. And the report is sent to Rome. There's a Jewish baby, not just any baby. This is the baby from the family of the princes. He was circumcised. It's an executable offense. Bring him to Rome. So the mom is forced to take the little baby to Rome. And along the way, she stops at an inn and she meets a Roman woman with also a small infant. And they start chatting. And the Roman woman discovers that this Jewish woman is taking the baby to Rome because they're inspecting the baby to find out if the baby is circumcised. And if the baby is circumcised, they're going to kill both mom and baby. So this Roman woman, she has mercy upon the Jewish baby, and they do a swapperoo, a switcheroo. And the Jewish baby goes to the Roman mom, and the Roman baby goes to the Jewish mom. And when she arrives in Rome, they pull off the diaper, child's uncircumcised. I'm sorry, ma'am, for the inconvenience, for the misunderstanding. Go back home. And they swap the baby's back. All's well. And the Midrash tells us that Roman baby is none other. He'll grow up to be Antoninus. And the reason why he was inspired to pursue truth and to forfeit really the absolute pinnacle of Esav, and to become someone who submits himself to Rabbi Judah the Prince, like, where did this spark of holiness come from? It came from the couple of weeks that he was suckling from the mother of Rabbi Judah the Prince, from the holy mother of Rabbi Judah the Prince. That interaction that infused holiness within him, and therefore forever he had this stirring of holiness, and that manifested itself when he was an adult. He became the Roman emperor, a great, renowned leader, the most powerful person in the world. What does he do? He goes into a tunnel to go study Rabbi Judah the Prince, eventually converts, becomes a Jew himself. Where did he have that inspiration, that strength of character, that fortitude, that tenacious commitment to truth? It was because of the few weeks that he had suckled with Rabbi Judah the Prince's mom. And the question that I have not yet answered is, wait a minute. If we are told that you eat kosher food, you eat inspired food, you'll have that influence you positively. And on the flip side, if you eat non-kosher food that's from a very problematic source, that will influence you negatively. And in fact, in its time, we brought the story of Acher, of Elisha ben Avuya, his mom, you recall, when she was pregnant, she smelled pork from the idolatrous temple, and she went and she partook in it, and that was coursing within her, quivering like a venom, and that influenced the child negatively. How come Rabbi Judah the Prince was not negatively influenced by his few weeks suckling from the idolatrous Roman noblewoman when his mom was taking Antoninus? Rabbi Judah the Prince is the holy one, our holy teacher. Just when it says rabbi, it doesn't attribute which rabbi. That's the rabbi it's referring to. Where is the negative influence of him spending a few weeks with her and suckling from her? That's a fascinating question that one of y'all asked. You don't even remember, maybe a couple of years ago. It took me a while to get to it, but here's the answer. Rabbi Judah the Prince, at the end of his life, he lifts 10 fingers and he says, I never partook in any one of these delicacies. Now, does that mean that he never ate food? Of course he ate food. But he never absorbed it. It was always something that you eat, you partake because you need fuel to continue doing what Hashem wants of you. I think that's the answer. In his whole life, he says, he never did that. He was holy from beginning to end. So yes, he suckled from this woman, but he never absorbed it. He never partook in it. It was always something that he took because he needed to live. And that's why it never filtered down to his bones. And it never influenced him. He always had this hands-off approach with anything physical, anything material. And in his whole life, never even a small finger's worth of physicality, he never partook in it. And that's why, even though he had it, it did not influence him negatively. So again, it's a semi-related point that what you do with something matters as much as what that thing is. These 7 qualities of the Prince, he had all of them. And they could have all been cause for corruption and degradation. But he had all of them, and it was all used for righteousness. I think the lesson for us is qualities can be tools for greatness and for destruction. And we have to be very cognizant of all the things that we have, of all the tools that we have, of all the attributes that we are given. What are we using them for? There's lots of double-edged swords that we are juggling. And yes, the sword can be used for a good purpose, and it can be used for a destructive purpose. Our life, it's made possible with fire. Think about fire. How useful is fire? You look around you, think about modern life or human life. Like there's basically nothing that you could do if you didn't have fire. You basically can't have any food. You can eat raw vegetables, okay. But there's basically nothing that you could do without fire. But of course, fire could be destructive. All these qualities could be used for good things, for bad things. Splitting the atom. There was this dream of effectively infinite power that's too cheap to meter. But it also has the potential to very close to something so destructive it could destroy the whole world. There are qualities. There's many qualities. And 7 of them listed in our mission, but really it's all of them, all the qualities. This Mishnah, it seems like the Mishnah is highlighting these 7 qualities as per the verse and as to impress upon us how great Rabbi Judah the Prince was. They have all of these qualities in spades, and nevertheless, it was used entirely for righteousness. But really, the concept is that qualities, it's all what we make of them. And now that we're aware of this, and we pay attention and we think about what qualities do we have and how are we marshaling them? How are we deploying them? Hopefully we could be the kinds of people that use our qualities for good, for righteousness, and not to be drawn away from the Almighty and away from righteousness and toward the world. That would be a very negative use of these qualities, and hopefully we'll use them only for good. I appreciate your attention. As we approach the end of Pirkei Avos, we've just got a couple of missionaries left to go. I'm very excited. Looking forward to your questions and comments and your feedback. And of course, my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.